I just celebrated 5 years with the foundation this past January, overseeing all of our internal operations, including HR, IT, finance, accounting, and grants management. If it keeps the place up and running or moves money, it probably lives with someone on my team. And I think I saw this in the group chat already. My runway song is also Golden by Jill Scott, especially the lyrics, I'm taking my freedom, pulling it off the shelf. It feels really aligned with this season I'm in, trying to move with more joy, more intention, and less apology. And it feels really good to be in this space together with you. I am looking forward to our conversation and what it opens up for all of us. And I will pass to Dana.
Thank you, Jolene. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I know some folks are probably calling in from the East Coast. My name is Dana Mason. I am the Director of Operations for Kataly Foundation. I use she, her pronouns. I am located in Oakland on the ancestral land of the Ohlone people. I will be celebrating my 5-year anniversary at the end of the month. And I wear many hats here at Kataly. I manage the contracts and the vendor process, operations, systems. I'm on a part of the HR team as well, looking at benefits and policies, and I even do some events management. I'm excited that you're all here and looking forward to the conversation. And I will pass it on to Kimmy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kemi Rollet. I'm the People and Culture Manager. I use she, her, and I'm also located in ancestral Ramaytush Ohlone land in San Francisco. And I have been with Kataly a little over a year and a half. And part of my role is to support the multitude of ways that we are in relationship to each other as an organization, whether that is through our in-person meetings. As Jolene mentioned, we are a fully remote organization, supporting our staff development, learning, and training, and also thinking through our preparation and planning for spend out. So that's just some of what my role is at the organization. And yes, oh, Zainab, did you mention the
Oh yeah,
AI?
I just wanted to make, sorry, I forgot a few housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar, and I'm also just going to be, if I see any AI note takers in here, I will be removing them, or you can remove them yourselves just for digital security purposes. So hand it back to you, Kemi, to ground us before we begin.
Okay. Again, thank you so much, all. And I'm going to just take a few minutes to frame our conversation today and sort of our invitation and our offering. And folks, first, Jolene will share more, but for those who may not be familiar, the Kataly Foundation moves resources to support the economic, political, and cultural power of Black and Indigenous communities and all communities of color, and particularly by resourcing organizations and collectives that are building power, sovereignty, and self-determination for themselves and their communities. We are also a spend out foundation. We were actually founded as a spend out. And part of our commitment is to redistribute all of our assets within a certain amount of time. And so we are actually in the second half of our lifetime as a spend out and moving towards spend out in the next few years. And part of what being founded as a spend out with a commitment to wealth redistribution has allowed us to do is to really honor the ethos of experimentation. And you'll see that really woven throughout the whole organization and also in our operations. And so part of what we've been thinking a lot about is, when we're thinking about liberatory practices and operations, as we shared in the sort of description of this session, it's been a journey. It's been a journey of practice and noticing of the ways we moved in default, had to step back, reassess growth. And we also really recognize that there are a lot of people who are asking similar questions. We are not the only ones. And also a lot of folks who have been contending with how do we think about culture in operations, in our work, and in our movements. And and so that's part of our offering today as operations workers that are particularly focused in philanthropy is to create space for a pause and to be in community and to do some learning together around how we're contending with this moment. So really grateful for the loving nudge that Zainab pushed our team and just like, yeah, let's just create a space to really be thinking and practicing together. So to be sure, this is not a skills technical workshop. We are not, stepping in with like, this is the right way, the only way. We know that all of you have particular contexts in which you're working in. And so we really hope that this hour together, folks are able to leave with more questions collectively, that we have some shared insights, and that we also have some awareness. Again, we're particularly located in philanthropy, are where the deeper spaces that folks are like interrogating some of these things that we'll be talking about and raising today. So that is our offering and invitation. And a few more pieces that we wanted to ground our conversation is culture and operations. So, first of all, that's the language we use internally. So, that is the language I'll be using, but I recognize that different folks use different language, and there's an umbrella of a lot of things. But we really recognize that culture and operations contribute to the how, that in many ways they're sort of the what of what we do in our organizations, but the how is just as critical. And we really think about that as the scaffolding and infrastructure that support and undergird our movements, our organizations, our people. I really love Project South's offering when they think about movement infrastructure, that it's so many components that I think that we can really hold and resource when we think about operations and our work around culture, collective care, governance, training, safety, protection, convergent spaces, and so many things. And so within the context of our organizations, we are thinking about the ways that like our policies, our procedures, our processes, our methods of communication and on are really where our stated values either go to thrive or they go to wither, really. And so continuing to hold deep rigor and how we're thinking about our work and the scaffolding of our organizations and movements, it's really core to our work at Kataly and also what we hope to offer in this conversation. And then the sort of other piece that we want to hold is that the history of operations in HR is complicated. It has a very complicated lineage. It's a very complicated terrain, right? And so, yes, there are many ways in which the lineages of HR, personnel management, that language was around workplace safety, wages, and particularly around the implementation of the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1930s, which, we sort of see as the kind of canon piece of legislation that a lot of our work in policy, legal compliance, all of the downstream things that we're thinking about in operations in HR, that's sort of where it extends from. But we also have to recognize that the Fair Labor Standards Act excluded agricultural, retail, service, domestic workers, work roles that were primarily held by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So this landmark law actually excluded 90% of Black women workers at the time. So we have to really like hold and wrestle with that the legal framework for how we do operations in the US was codified exclusion and codified laws that are foundationally anti-Black and at the subjugation of Black workers. And so we have to really wrestle with that and how does that shape how we enter into these fields, what we're taught about what is truth, what is neutral, and particularly as we're in organizations that express a deep commitment to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we also know that a lot of the lineage of HR was to curtail worker power in the 1900s, right, around unionization, worker movements, and even the separation of the C3, C4, C5. There are ways to de-silo that workers and communities can build power, right? So there are also all of these embedded structures that we have to wrestle with that are actually in service of the state, disempowering, subjugating workers and people of color. And also philanthropy. I don't need to go into philanthropy's messy history, but that is our site of practice. I know that there are folks on the call who may be in other organizations, industries. But again, our site of practice, the origin story was really around the preservation and concentration of wealth and power, right? A political project of whiteness and the wealthy elite. So that's such important context for us in this work so that we can constantly locate ourselves at these sites of dissonance, both in sort of the lineage and also the presence. And so when we really talk about extraction and how a lot of these systems were designed to be extractive in service of the state, we have to contend with how does it show up in our work every day. So when we talk about moving from extraction to care, we really also know that that is a deep commitment to a politic, right? It is purposeful that the fascist administration has weaponized infrastructure in our organizations to threaten and decimate our power, right? So we have to dispel the fallacy that we sometimes think of as operations workers as neutral, that this work, the site of work, is deeply inherently political, and we are moving from a politic at all times. Sometimes we may not recognize it, or we may obscure it, um, or we don't claim it, right? And so when we think about those lineages and that dissonance, then when we really sit with care, support, and accountability, it helps us to recognize that the conditions that we're in are new, but also not new. And it also helps us to recognize that there is sort of a long history of contending with this context and this work. So I also just want to name that tending to the scaffolding of our people and our organizations, it's such heart-filled love work. I always try to resist the ways in which sometimes like the dogma, the binary, the neutrality of people in ops and HR tries to like remove the heart and the agency in the work. And also someone said the other day that operations work ain't sexy. It is sexy. Let us reclaim the sexy. Operations can be very sexy. It's a place to do some dreaming and playing and hold curiosity. So we're just holding all of those things as we step into this conversation, right? That this is the context that we're in. This is the political moment that we're in. And really grateful for just this space to pause and for you all to hear a little bit about our journey and hopefully for this to be a space where we can learn and hear from you all as well. And in that spirit, I'm going to offer some group agreements before I pivot to um, a poll question we have for you is, and let me post it in the chat, is as we sit in this conversation today, let's just practice good listening, asking questions, responsibility to the whole, holding care for how we hold this space in our time together. Speak from the I, honor that there are multiple truths. I think one of the gifts of operations is that we don't have to move from a binary. We can hold grace and we can see ourselves in the we. And part of that last offering is the ways I think that sometimes in HR and operations, we can other ourselves and other the folks that we are working in service of. And we are also workers, right? And so let us see ourselves in the we and resist the sort of us versus them binary. And with that, I will turn to Zainab for a poll because we'd love to learn a little bit more about who is in the room with us.
Thank you so much, Kemi, for just like sharing that history with us. I did not know most of that, and I'm sort of getting that sense from some folks who are sharing in the chat too. So thank you for that. Okay, so we just want to kind of get a sense of who is in the space with us today. So if folks can just answer this quick poll with lots of options, of what role you play in your organization. I'll just give it like 30 seconds. Pretty quick question. Sorry, I did do single choice for this. Apologies. I probably should have I know there's a lot of dual role folks. So sorry. Pick your favorite part of your position for the poll. Okay. Let's see where we are. Um, so hopefully folks can see that. We've got a good chunk of programs folks with us, some grants management, a few finance, some people in culture, HR, some ops folks, no IT folks here, and then some other. So thank you all for just letting us know who's here because it helps us think about what we want to share with you all today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Jolene to share a little bit more about Kataly's journey to developing its framework for people in ops.
Thank you, Zainab. And thank you, Kemi, for so beautifully framing this work and where we are in this moment. So just a few weeks ago, I attended the Association of Black Foundations, Foundation Executives, or ABFE conference here in San Francisco. And 10 years ago, when they last held it here, there were about 200 people in attendance. This year, over 1,200. I feel that so many people showed up because in this moment, people are searching for spaces where they feel safe, spaces where they can actually show up as themselves. I ended up sitting next to a young woman who works in corporate philanthropy for a big organization that will remain unnamed. And she told me something that has stayed with me. She said that being in that space where she felt seen and valued gave her the clarity and courage to think about leaving her job because in her organization, she felt they prioritized the brand and profit over community transformation. And that showed up internally in how staff were treated. You can have a great mission and do great work, but psychological safety in the workplace is about the internal dynamics of an organization. Now, philanthropy can look good on the surface. We move millions of dollars in grants, but we are still operating within an extractive economic system, one that prioritizes profit over people and the planet. So the questions we have to ask ourselves are, what are the extractive systems within our own organizations that exploit our people? And are we centering the care, dignity, and humanity of the people who do the work every single day? Now, over the past year and a half, we have seen a steady march towards authoritarianism. The hateful rhetoric, mass firings of workers, stripping of protections, aggressive detention and deportation efforts. And in moments like this, it's really easy to locate the problem out there, right? In policy, in government, in systems that feel distant from our day-to-day work. But these dynamics don't stay external. Many of the patterns we're witnessing at the national level, people being treated as expendable, systems rooted in extraction, they show up in quieter ways inside our own institutions. I recently read a piece by Scott Nagakawa that really sharpened this for me. He argues that if we don't transform the underlying systems of power, they will simply reassert themselves, even if we win. So, at a macro level, economic systems shape what people are able to do. It shapes what risks they can take and how much agency they have. And there is a direct parallel inside the microeconomy of our own organizations. So much power lives in the systems we often treat as neutral. Operations, we're talking finance, HR, policies, decision making. They're the internal systems that shape power. They determine who has access to information. They determine who can take risks, who feels secure and safe, and who doesn't. So, as Kemia was saying, operations is not neutral. Operations is where we can practice the world we are trying to build. I want to pause here for just a few minutes and say that the internal functioning of our organization is deeply collective. Things don't happen because one person has a good idea. They happen because people are willing to question, to experiment and stay in it, even when we make mistakes or it gets messy. And I'm incredibly grateful to our people and ops team who you've met and to our partners who have been willing to do that work alongside us. And they're just noted here on the slide. So today we're sharing Kataly's own winding journey, how we've worked to craft policies and practices that reflect our values and that move us towards something more abundant, and human. So at our core, Kataly's mission is about shifting power, about moving resources to support the economic, political, and cultural power of Black and Indigenous communities and all communities of color. It's about transforming our relationship to capital, to each other, and to the planet. With the transformative work we have been doing externally, it became imperative that we examine our own internal systems, how we create policies and processes, how we allocate resources and compensate people for their work, and how we allow spaciousness for rest and reflection. So, in doing that, we felt a need to be really explicit to articulate a clear vision for how we operate internally, one that is aligned with the world we are trying to build. And so, our People and Ops vision statement is to cultivate radically people-centered strategies, liberatory practices, and transformative impact in service of our mission. And that means to us centering our people, not just in what we say, but also in how we resource them and how decisions get made every single day. There are a few principles that ground this work for us. It starts with the belief that our people power our achievements and we power theirs. The well-being of our staff is not secondary to the mission, it is foundational to it. We don't believe in change for the sake of change, but as an intentional evolution in service of our mission. And as we set new standards, we commit to stay rooted in our values. Finally, I wanted to share some of the strategy that reflects this commitment. So at Kataly, we've tried to really prioritize intentionality, even when it means slowing down, because one of the patterns we're trying to interrupt is this pressure to move fast at the expense of people. So instead of jumping straight to solutions, we ground our work in three core practices. First, we empathize and define, which means we start by deeply understanding the lived experience of our staff, not assuming that we know what people need, but asking through listening sessions, one-on-one conversations, and feedback. We translate what we hear into real insights that shape how we design our policies.
12:30 is in Eshelman 3, sorry, is in Eshelman 310. Yes?
Sure,
I'm
mind
going to rename the group.
if you can. Thank you. We, through listening sessions, one-on-one conversations, and feedback, and we translate what we hear into real insights that shape how we design our policies and practices. And one example of that is a comprehensive staff experience survey we completed last year, which showed us the things we were doing right, like the fact that our staff experience high levels of psychological safety and a great sense of empowerment and belonging. But it also revealed that we could improve in many ways by providing more clarity about how decisions are made and that our people and ops team could communicate more effectively. Second, we inquire and imagine. We step back and we examine what's already in place and we try to find the gaps. And we also look at where are we intentionally creating friction or harm in how we're delivering our support. And we try to do this work with staff. We took our entire team on a week-long learning journey last year to Montgomery, Alabama. And we were really excited about this opportunity to ground ourselves in the history of this country and how it connects to the mission of Kataly. But we had to consider what the impact of this trip would be on our teams and their families. So we asked the question, what will make it possible for you to participate in this trip? And by answering that question, we were able to support our team in feeling ready to embark on what was a lengthy and emotional trip, knowing that they were well-resourced and their families felt supported. So lastly, we prototype and try. We test, we learn, and we adjust. We focus on being clear and transparent in our communication. And we try to create real opportunities for dialogue, helping people understand not just what is happening, but why. So we recently instituted a change in our data retention policy, and I'll be transparent in saying the rollout did not go very well. We realized that we moved way too fast. Had we slowed down and prioritized intentionality, gathered all of the information we needed, we could have saved a lot of grief and frustration. But being willing to admit when we mess up and adjust to make things right is part of the journey we're on together. Knowing that this is not linear work, it is iterative. It requires us to stay responsive, to stay in relationship, and be willing to evolve. So I'll just end here by posing a question for all of you. Please feel free to put your answers in the chat box throughout our conversation. We want to hear from you. What is one thing your organization does really well that centers the care, well-being, and dignity of staff? So just write that, think about that for a minute, put your response in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. And I'll turn it back to Zainab.
Thank you so much, Jolene, for sharing that, for sharing, kind of grounding us in Kataly's own journey, how we moved along the way. And yes, as Jolene said, please offer some responses to this question in the chat. I'm going to stop my screen share because we're going to move into a group conversation, but maybe what we can do is we can copy and paste this question into the chat so that folks have it in their heads as they're sort of thinking as our programming continues. So yes, thank you, Jolene and Kemi for kind of grounding us before we get into our discussion. I also just want to uplift for folks. We've had a couple of folks kind of share things, materials they'd be curious to see. Please feel free to keep doing that in the chat. If there's something someone mentions and you are curious to learn more about it, please drop that in the chat. We will be tracking that. We are going to try our best to leave some time for Q&A at the end. And if questions come to mind as folks are speaking, please feel free to drop those in the chat as well. And we will try to get to them at the conclusion of our webinar. So now we're going to move into our fireside chat conversation with Dana, Kemi, and Jolene. And we're going to start that with just inviting our people and ops team to kind of share a little bit more about their origin stories, what brought them to the work of operations, of people and culture, of finance. And so, Kemi, I'm going to invite you to kick us off by sharing a little bit about your origin story of what brings you to the work.
Thank you. So there were sort of a few landmarks I was thinking about to this question. And so one is a prior workplace where it's San Francisco, a health or organization, a community health-based center. And I was tasked with creating a workforce and community engagement program that focused on Black women and girls in the Fillmore Western Edition. And there's nothing like building a program to center Blackness in a historically white and very culturally white nonprofit health center that will give you expansive operations and infrastructure education. And so, very early in my career, over 20 years ago, in trying to build this program, it really helped me to understand the truly nuanced ways white supremacy and anti-Black racism embeds in the infrastructure of organizations, policies, and culture. And we also were a really small organization. When I started, we were just 7 folks, and by the time I left, we were 33. And so part of it was just having to build through learning. And then the big core piece was also working in a workers' rights organization where a lot of my work was around working with Black worker centers, working around occupational segregation, and also thinking about workers' rights for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated workers. And so, again, it was just a very humbling opportunity to really learn how a lot of our systems are not designed for those types of workers to thrive. And I've also been a supervisor. I've had almost over 40 direct reports from folks who are just entering the workforce to folks who had been in the workforce for 40 years and, were labor attorneys, right? Talking about supervising labor attorneys, we could put that to the after 40. That was an adventure. But it also helped me understand what is required of an organization to be support and be in service of a myriad of worker experiences. So I would say that all of that really helped me understand some curiosity of like, why were liberal and progressive organizations so dissonant in all directions, from leadership, from staff? And so even though I'd been in programmatic work for 20 years, I really just wanted to be more deeply steeped in operations and had been doing operations. And so I just felt really grateful for this role, and the ways in which being in a space with, movement practitioners, um, and thinking through like leadership and accountability is part of what brought me to this work. And I'll pass it to Dana.
Thank you, Kimmy, and thank you for this question, Zainab. Um, Many moons ago, I started my own business, and when you're a solo founder, you don't really get to pick a lane. So I was the CEO, the CFO, and HR, the entire HR department, all of it. And when you find yourself in a situation like that, you don't really, you have to move pretty quickly or things fall apart. You have to figure things out pretty quickly. I was coming from corporate America, grew up in corporate America, so I just kind of defaulted to what I knew. I built the same systems that I had learned in the big companies that I had worked for. So they were very structured, very focused on control and efficiency. And honestly, they worked. But looking back, they weren't exactly built on looking at the human side of human resources. Um, but what I did learn through all of that was that I really did like building the bones of how an organization runs. Um, I like the way things connect. I like how people move through processes. That really challenges me, and I really enjoy it. So when the opportunity at Kataly presented itself, I saw something rare. I saw a chance to like actually do things differently. Um, Coming into the social justice space, I wasn't interested in like really placing the same old playbook on top of the work the way I had already done it. I thought this would be an opportunity to kind of ask questions, ask the harder questions like, what do these systems actually, who do these systems actually serve? Who do they leave out? And I really thought I was going to have the opportunity to build an HR and operations practice that reflected my values, one that centered on dignity, and seeing the whole humanity of a person. Um, and it was an opportunity to not kind of just check the compliance boxes, but really build a liberatory practice from the inside out. And so in a way, my whole career has really led me to this opportunity at Kataly. It's really been leading to this. It's taken everything I've kind of learned about how organizations work and just really asking the questions, who should they really be working for? And so I try to ask myself that every day. And okay, guess I kind of leave it at that. And I'll pass it on to Jolie.
Let's see. Thanks, Dana. I think I found my way to this work in a roundabout way. I have a finance degree and I started as a program assistant in a big foundation, and that's how I was introduced to philanthropy. Um, but I always love thinking about how organizations function behind the scenes and how systems and people experience the workplace and how decisions got made. And that was always what energized me. I love being behind the scenes. And over the years, I've worked across philanthropy. I've worked in nonprofit organizations, higher education, some really small community-based organizations. And for a long time, I just accepted things the way they were. There were definitely practices and policies that didn't sit right with me, things that were like unnecessarily rigid. But I think I'd internalized the idea that they were just that's just how it was. Like, this is what professionalism looks like. And this is how institutions protect themselves. And I didn't have the language for why some of it felt really uncomfortable. And it wasn't later, until later in my career that I began to understand that much of what I was reacting to was norms rooted in dominant culture, systems that are based on control, scarcity, perfectionism, risk management, all of the words that we come across every day in operations. But even once you recognize that, it's another thing entirely to believe you actually have the ability or permission to do things differently. And I think that coming to Kataly really changed that for me. And for the first time, I felt like I was in a place where we could not only question systems, but actually reimagine them, where this could become a place to practice our values instead of just enforce rules. And I want to be really transparent. It was not some magical overnight transformation. When I joined the foundation, we had already a lot of policies in place. We were also in the middle of a pandemic. I was hiring staff, onboarding people remotely, and building systems in real time during a really disorienting moment. And while we offered a really generous benefits package from the very beginning, I would say it was a slow walk towards what I would now call liberatory practice for because it took time, it took a experimentation and unlearning. And I definitely didn't do that work alone. I really want to credit Dana, who has been with me from the beginning, and Kimmy, whose arrival helped really create the room for us to do the deeper work we wanted to do around culture and people practices. I've also learned so much from Anisha Desai from Mayorta, who has coached me and really pushed my thinking. And there was this report that Borealis Philanthropy and Research Action Design put out a few years ago on racial equity and liberatory practices that helped me put into words and practice reimagining how we could do our operations at Kataly. So now a lot of my work is about creating an organization where people feel valued, where they feel trusted, supported, and able to fully show up as themselves. And being at Catalia has given me both the language and the courage to begin moving towards that more intentionality.
Thank you so much, Jolene, Kemi, Dana, for just like kind of sharing a little bit more about how you come to this work, what you bring to this work, like who you really are as people, and not just in your kind of job title. So now I'm going to move us into a little bit more conversation for folks to hear more about the journey, the messiness, the challenges, the obstacles. And so that's going to be our first question to kick us off with Jolene and Dana. I'm wondering if you both could share a little bit about some of the barriers and challenges to implementing policies that put people first. I think this is something you both have sort of spoken to a little bit, but we'd love for you to get into the details a little bit more and also share how our policies at Katali have evolved over time.
Okay, I will start. And if I'm answering this question honestly, I will say the biggest barrier was me, or more specifically, everything I had been taught. I came in thinking that I knew what best practices look like because I had worked at some of the premier companies in the world. But what I didn't fully see at the time was how that training that I had was really rooted in white supremacy culture, um, risk mitigation, compliance, control. I mean, that stuff really gets baked into who you are, and you don't even realize that you're carrying it out one door and into the next door, to be honest. And when I got here, we were also getting some support from an outside partner, and we started to realize that their guidance was also coming really from the same place. It was fear-based, it was defensive, it was that protect the organization at all cost kind of vibe. And when we pushed for something more aligned, we were met with pushback. And that kind of told us everything we needed to know. It certainly told me everything I needed to know. I needed to change. And also that partnership needed to change as well. So even before we found the right partner, and that was a process in and of itself, and eventually we did find the right partner, we internally we kind of changed our approach. Instead of saying, what are our policies, we started asking, what do we want to be? Who do we want to be? Instead of asking, like, can we do this? We started asking, how can we do this? And that kind of one reframe really changed everything about how we build policy now. Um, but I have to be straight with you, just like Jolene said, we stumbled, we made some missteps, we got our hands slapped a time or two, but we didn't scrap the whole thing. We regrouped, we learned, and we kept going. And I really think that's kind of the real work, not getting it perfect, but having the courage to keep choosing people over policy, even when that's hard. So, yeah, and I'll
Yeah,
just leave it right there.
yeah, you said it so well, Dana, and I echo all of Dana's comments. I think for me, whenever there's something that we want to implement, there are the questions like, what's the legal team going to say? How are we going to administer this? Will this create inconsistency? What happens if something goes wrong? And yeah, these are all legitimate questions, I think. We still have real operational responsibilities. But like Dana said, it's not in letting those things define the conversation, right? Because I think underneath those questions are this deeper assumption that people can't be trusted, or that we have to prioritize protection over humanity. And a lot of HR practices, of course, are rooted in scarcity and mistrust, based on things that people have done in the past, even if that's unintentional. So interrogating those assumptions, and like Dana said, asking where the policies reflect the values that we hold, and that's how our policies have evolved over time. So initially, a lot of infrastructure building, as we were founded as a spin out organization, making sure the organization functioned well. But yes, we've started asking different questions over time. How does this policy impact people? Does it center our values? How is it written? That's led us to a lot more flexibility where possible, and being imagining different ways of doing things. And I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned and realized is that care and accountability are not opposites. You can create systems that are clear, responsible, and sustainable while still centering humanity and dignity.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I'm going to move us into our next question, which is, how do you feel Kataly's structure supports a values-aligned approach to operations internally? And for this, I'm going to turn to you, Kemi, to share some of your thoughts.
Yeah, and I am mindful of time, so I'll do some high level reflection. But a few of the examples that I wanted to name is really how we ground and create time around our political education and learning. And so that, again, internally, we are aligned with sort of the work that we see in our ecosystem through our grantees and our partners, but that we have a deeper embodied understanding of the lineages, but also the present context, so that that can make us just like bring more rigor in our analysis as an organization, and also how we are moving as a collective, especially as we're moving towards spend out and really thinking through, what is our role in supporting the grantees, but also in sort of supporting the organizing and advocacy in this space. And one piece that's very tender and meaningful is also we have an incredible mindfulness and healing justice program is one of our core pillars, and one of our practitioners, consultants, healers, Larry Yang, has created mindfulness sessions for staff for several years. And every week creates mindfulness sessions for us to step into a space to pause, step into a space to have an embodied connection to the work that we're doing and the context. And we also have Larry's gifts during our staff meetings. And so often we open our staff meeting with a mindfulness grounding. And I just think that for that to be, and I came into the organization with that as its collective practice, was just another emblematic way of us really living into the values of not just the work that we're doing, but how are we trying to transform ourselves as we are in service of this work as well. And I don't know, Julian, would you like to talk about the discretionary grants program, or I'm happy to lift that too.
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that's really meaningful to us is our employee discretionary grants program. So instead of matching employee donations, which can unintentionally reinforce inequity because, people have different levels of disposable income. Every employee at Kataly receives the same amount of funding to direct toward causes and communities they care about. And those funds go into an individual donor advised fund that staff themselves control, and we don't require people to report back to us or seek approval around where they give funds. And that I feel like that is trust that's just part of the abundance that we want to share with our staff. And knowing that the staff know where to move resources in ways that align with their own values, and they know what matters to their communities.
Thank you all so much. Transparent facilitator moment. We definitely had some more questions we were hoping to get into, but we also really want to leave some space for folks on the webinar to share your questions with us. So would love to invite folks to share questions, and you are welcome to, pose those questions in the chat. You're also welcome to just like come off mute, voice your question out loud. Don't be shy. We welcome, put us on the spot, ask us all the tough questions.
I can go. Hello, my name is Nina. I'm from the Waverly Street Foundation, and I would love to learn more about how you approach these ideas at a leadership level within an organization for folks that might not be familiar with a lot of the pillars that you guys are discussing, how to introduce them to these ideas, if you can share a little bit about that.
I think what we've been really lucky is that our leadership team came to this work with a lot of those values. I mean, it's reflected in a lot of the work that we do as an organization, and that is something that we have. We've also been on this political education journey together to make sure that we are all grounded in the same principles and understanding of what the work is and how that is reflected in both our external way that we show up for grantee partners and in how we approach everything internally. Maybe Kimmy could talk a little bit about like what it is about how we share information from staff to the leadership team to actually inform a lot of how we do our work.
Sure. I mean, I would briefly say that, I think one of the things I am grateful for in this position is the spaciousness to um, be in a relationship with both staff and leadership in ways where that actually supports um, like thoughtfulness, the ability for there to be feedback, and that we have also a lot of containers within the organization where different layers of conversations are happening, and that I'm able to sort of, help to synthesize and also do some, not necessarily translation, but work with both staff and with the leadership team and sort of sitting with questions that are coming up as they're coming up. I think the also, something that may not be sort of underlining your question, but I want to name as deeply important is that you also have to have a leadership team that is committed to embodying and implementation of liberatory values. I think it's very easy to say some of these things out loud. And I feel really grateful to be in a space with a leadership team that moves with accountability, integrity, and a commitment to practice. And I've been in organizations where that isn't present, and it's really hard to do this work without that context as well.
Thank you both, and thank you for the question, Nina. There's a couple questions in the chat, somewhat similar. Can you share an example of a typical HR policy that you changed as a result of this work? Sort of relatedly, what's a dominant practice that you reimagined and transformed?
I would say that one of the practices is probably our time off policy, and that we when I first started at Kataly, it was just you take your time off around the holidays because, that's what you do. And then we kind of moved from having, we're going to close, we're going to shut down for 1 week during the holidays, and that's going to be paid. And then, and honestly, to be honest, a lot of our partners were doing this as well. And so we moved to just shutting down totally paid for 2 weeks around the holidays between the end of the year and the beginning of the year. And we tend to do a lot of that around the holidays. We have a Labor Day break. We don't just get Labor Day off. We changed some of our time off policies for new employees. We had 3 levels when folks first started. You had to work a certain amount of time, up to 3 years, to get to the next level, and we just kind of cut out the bottom level altogether. And so because that's one of the big things when you start a new job, you don't have any time. You can't take off any time. So now we only have those 2 levels of time off. So I would say those were some really big things. I think that reimagining, giving people the space and time to take that kind of care. We also have what we call Reflection Week that we do every July, somewhere around the second or third week of July, where people can just kind of really focus on something that's important to them. No meetings, no calls. Um, and nothing that you're expected to do for literally for the organization. Just kind of spend some time focused on something that is important and meaningful to you. So I would say that was a big move or reimagining for us.
Thank you, Dana. This is a question that I think is a great question to end on, which is, what's a change you want to see but haven't accomplished yet?
Um, I, I'm not sure what, there's a lot of, there's some things, I think, I want to just lift up a practice that we have been doing and I'd love to support more of is, we work with a lot of small businesses and independent contractors and people from historically marginalized communities. And we have wanted to engage with vendors in a way that is more relational and more sustainable and less extractive. So that's led us to rethink things like reducing unnecessary invoicing requirements, having more transparent conversations about pricing. We noticed that many small vendors are undercharged for their work. And instead of automatically accepting the lowest estimate, we sometimes found ourselves encouraging people to think about sustainable pricing and models that actually reflected the true value of their labor and experience. And I think that's something that we'd like to see more of and continue to do.
Kemi, you want to join in?
Yeah, I really love that question. And, we are a spend out. And so we are thinking a lot about what does it mean to end well. And I think that, in the sort of zeitgeist of philanthropy, we have some examples of foundations that have not ended well. And so we hope that in how we're working with staff and, within the boundaries of, again, sort of what we've talked about in terms of implementation and legal and compliance, that we can develop a really robust, rigorous, imaginative transition program that really honors the labor of all of the staff. And that we also build in the embodiment components of what it means to transition, what it means to end, and recognizing that there might be a myriad of feelings. There might be grief, there might be joy, there might be excitement. And so all to say the we haven't developed it yet. We're working really hard, but the hope is to develop a yeah, transition program that we hope can be a loving offering and a model, not just for our staff, but for the field.
Thank you so much, Kemi. Just want to honor folks' time, and I know we're a minute over, but thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to put this poll out about future programming. Just, as you're leaving, you can answer it if you would be interested in more programming on this topic. We will be sending around the recording to everyone who registered, along with some of the resources that folks requested, plus resources from our partners. Again, thank you all so much for taking the time to be here with us today, for engaging with us, for asking us questions. And thank you to Dana and Kemi and Jolene for both like leading the people in ops work at Kataly and for sharing that journey so beautifully with all of us today. So thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, all.
Thank you.